Those who grew up in the 1970s were shaped by a world that quietly demanded self-reliance. Childhood unfolded with fewer explanations, fewer emotional check-ins, and a strong expectation to figure it out. Parents were often present physically, but distant psychologically, not out of neglect, but because that was the language of the time. As a result, many children learned early that competence was valued more than expression, and resilience more than reassurance. They adapted by becoming observant, inwardly alert, and capable of managing discomfort without external validation. From a psychological perspective, this environment accelerated independence, but it also trained the mind to internalize emotion rather than share it. Feelings were processed privately, often through reflection instead of dialogue. Over time, this created adults who are calm in crisis, practical in decision making, and unusually comfortable with solitude. Yet beneath this strength lies a quieter truth. When emotions are repeatedly handled alone, they do not disappear. They settle into the unconscious, shaping behavior in subtle but powerful ways. Carl Jung reminded us that what is not made conscious is lived out unconsciously. For those shaped by this era, the task is not to abandon their independence, but to balance it with awareness. True maturity is not learned in silence alone. It emerges when inner strength finally learns how to speak. Growing up in the 1970s meant living through uncertainty without being taught to name it. Economic instability, social upheaval, and rapid cultural change were not discussed in emotional terms, they were endured. Children absorbed this atmosphere silently, learning that discomfort was not a crisis, but a condition of life. Over time, this shaped a form of resilience that was quiet, practical, and deeply internalized. Strength was not something to display. It was something to rely on when no help was coming. Psychologically, this produced adults who tolerate pressure remarkably well. They do not panic easily, they persist through fatigue, and they often become the ones others lean on during chaos. But endurance, when unexamined, can harden into emotional self-denial. Many from this generation learned to survive first and reflect later. Pain was managed through responsibility, not understanding, and stress was carried rather than questioned. Jung spoke of the danger of identifying too strongly with the persona, the role one plays to function in the world. When resilience becomes the identity, vulnerability feels like failure. Yet true psychological strength includes the capacity to pause, to feel, and to reinterpret past hardship with awareness. Resilience should not mean lifelong endurance of unnecessary weight. It should become wisdom. The challenge now is not to prove strength, but to transform it, by choosing consciousness over survival and meaning over mere endurance. For those who came of age in the 1970s, work was never just a task. It was a measure of character. Responsibility was taught early and reinforced daily, not through motivational language, but through expectation. You did what needed to be done, often without praise, because reliability itself was the reward. This cultivated a powerful work ethic rooted in discipline, persistence, and personal accountability. Effort became synonymous with worth, and consistency became a moral value. Psychologically, this shaped adults who take commitments seriously. They show up, they follow through, and they often carry more than their share without complaint. Yet this same strength can quietly narrow the definition of identity. When self-worth is built primarily on usefulness, rest can feel undeserved, and emotional needs can feel like distractions. Jung warned that when one-sided values dominate the psyche, the neglected parts do not disappear, they wait. Over time, suppressed needs emerge as exhaustion, resentment, or a vague sense of emptiness despite outward success. This generation was taught how to function, but not always how to feel fulfilled. The task now is not to abandon discipline, but to expand its purpose. Work should serve the self, not replace it. Responsibility gains meaning when it includes responsibility to one's inner life. The real achievement is not how much you carry, but knowing when to set the weight down. One of the quiet legacies of growing up in the 1970s is the difficulty many have in expressing emotion or asking for help. Feelings were rarely discussed openly, not because they lacked importance, but because there was no language for them. Strength was demonstrated through control, composure, and self-sufficiency. As children, many learned that speaking about inner struggles brought little response, so they adapted by managing those struggles internally. Over time, this created adults who are articulate in action but hesitant in emotion. They can explain what needs to be done, yet struggle to explain what they feel. Asking for help may trigger discomfort or even shame, as if it signals weakness rather than humanity. Jung understood that when emotions are unacknowledged, they retreat into the unconscious, where they continue to influence behavior, often through irritability, withdrawal, or chronic tension. This is not emotional deficiency, it is emotional compression. The feelings are there, but they have been stored rather than shared. The psychological task is to translate inner experience into conscious language, to give emotion a voice without fearing loss of strength. Expression does not dismantle resilience, it deepens it. Growth begins the moment silence is replaced with honest articulation, and strength learns that it no longer has to stand alone. People shaped by the 1970s tend to value loyalty in a way that feels almost instinctive. Commitment was not treated as a choice to be reconsidered, but as a principle to be honored. Relationships, careers, and personal values were approached with a long view, grounded in endurance rather than immediate satisfaction. This created individuals who remain steady when others waver, who stay present through difficulty, and who measure meaning over decades, not moments. Psychologically, this long-term orientation provides stability and depth. It allows for patience, perseverance, and trust to develop slowly and authentically. Yet loyalty, when unexamined, can become a quiet trap. Many remain in relationships or roles that no longer nurture them, confusing endurance with virtue. Jung spoke of the shadow as the parts of ourselves we overlook in the name of moral ideals. Here, the shadow may appear as unspoken resentment, emotional stagnation, or a sense of life being lived out of obligation rather than choice. The task is not to abandon loyalty, but to refine it. True commitment requires consciousness. It asks not only, how long can I stay, but also, what is this asking of my soul? Loyalty gains depth when it includes honesty and self-respect. The deepest form of faithfulness is not staying at all costs, but staying aligned with what allows the psyche to remain alive and whole. Beneath the composed exterior of those who grew up in the 1970s lies a rich and often overlooked inner world. This was a generation shaped before constant noise, endless screens, and digital distraction. Time was slower, solitude was common, and reflection happened naturally. Many learned to think deeply, to observe quietly, and to live much of their psychological life inwardly rather than outwardly. Silence was not empty, it was formative. From a Jungian perspective, this inward orientation nurtured a strong relationship with the inner psyche. Dreams, intuitions, and private reflections carried meaning, even if they were never openly discussed. Yet when inner life remains unexpressed for too long, it can feel disconnected from the outer world. Insight without integration becomes isolation. Meaning seeks embodiment. It wants to be lived, spoken, and shared. This generation often carries wisdom that was never fully articulated, insights formed through years of observation rather than instruction. The task now is to bring that inner depth into conscious expression, to allow reflection to inform action. Jung believed that individuation is the process of making the unconscious conscious, not to escape the world, but to engage it more fully. The invitation is clear: do not keep your inner life hidden. When reflection meets expression, wisdom becomes guidance, and a life quietly examined becomes a life powerfully lived.